The greatest generation had it easy. All they had to do was defeat the Nazis and Japan. We knew who the enemy was, we knew what must be done, and we were resolved to do it. No debate necessary. The soldiers who returned from Vietnam would not experience the ticker-tape parades given to our victorious troops in World War II, because the Vietnam-era debates over civil rights and anti-war sentiment, represented by massive student protests, did nothing to find successful diplomatic solutions to the war, the draft, or the social issues ripping the nation apart. After years of depression brought unemployment, eviction, and hunger on a scale Americans had never known. The United States was shocked out of its doldrums when Japan brought World War II to our shores on December 7, 1941. 1930s debates between isolationism and intervention gave way to crystal clear focus of a singular purpose: combating hate. Japan, the Nazis, and Hitler created a binary world of good and evil, where their villainous deeds were so horrific that Americans freely gave their bodies, minds, food, pantyhose, rubber, and everything else they could feed the war effort. 10 million fighting-age men from all social classes were inducted into the armed services, from all social classes, with nary a blip of protest. 50 million casualties, and 6 years later, World War II came to an end. But the world didn't fall into a peaceful state, as wartime allies, the U.S. and Soviet Union, catapulted into a Cold War of mistrust, and proxy wars that would consume the next 45 years. This rivalry was hardly new, as the post-World War I period saw the United States engage in a Red Scare, where people suspected of communist sympathy were fired from their jobs, arrested, and outright harassed, as the country debated the benefits of capitalism against the oppressive nature of communist principles. As the only two nations to emerge with any sense of power after the war, the United States and the Soviet Union began to divide the war between themselves as they sought to spread their influence. When China turned communist in 1949, American strategists grew worried. The rapid Soviet development of atomic and nuclear weapons convinced those same strategists that the communists weren't just interested in recruiting people to their cause, but rather that they were committed to threatening those who resisted them, such as the United States. When communist North Korean troops moved across the demilitarized zone into democratic South Korea on June 25, 1950, the debate between communists and capitalists moved beyond words, as the diplomacy created to maintain the peace between the two Koreas was violated, and the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union became a proxy war of actual death and destruction. President Dwight Eisenhower championed the domino theory, arguing that the United States must fully defend nations from communist attacks because if South Korea were allowed to fall to the rest of the region, it would quickly fall as well, thus putting pressure on a newly democratic Japan. The Korean War was significant, but because the U.S. was acting under the auspices of the United Nations police action, and the war was relatively quick, there wasn't too much debate about mission, cause, or costs. Threatening to detonate nuclear bombs can have a very diplomatic effect. America's next war, Vietnam, wouldn't be that easy. The 1950s docility of white patriarchy that produced McCarthyism and a second Red Scare gave way to a decade of activism where everything was questioned, especially authority. The World War II focus on defending the nation was absent, as most Americans could neither find Vietnam on a map, nor could they identify an evil to combat. The debate over the need for America to be in Vietnam intersected with a period of great social upheaval that saw Americans debate for people of color, women, and college students, while attacking moralistic rules in pretty much everything that limited people in any way. To ask the nation to support a war in these circumstances was only asking for trouble, which is exactly what Vietnam was for the United States. Everything about the 1960s was a debate, as those without power sought some semblance of equality with America's elites. Diplomatic discoveries were desperately needed, as civil rights protests led by Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, and Malcolm X were met with resistance from racists like George Wallace and Eugene Bull Connors, water cannons and attack dogs. The unrelenting peaceful protest saw some semblance of diplomacy achieved with the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But the racism it was designed to stop still exists. People of color were, and far from the only people experiencing debatable discrimination within the United States, as feminists activated by Betty Friedan's push for empowerment outside of the home, as a second wave of feminism swept across the land, with women burning bras and demanding diplomatic equal access to higher education and employment. Just as America was fracturing into a million pieces, the nation found itself embroiled in yet another war, Vietnam. With the domino theory in mind, President John F. Kennedy sent advisors to assist the democratic South Vietnamese with their defense. Kennedy was rumored to be considering removing said advisors, but his subsequent death and Lyndon Johnson's elevation to president ended any debate about removal, as LBJ ordered a large-scale military intervention after U.S. destroyers were alleged to have been attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats in the Gulf of Tonkin. With little debate, Congress passed its Gulf of Tonkin resolution, giving the president broad war-making powers in Vietnam rather than seek a diplomatic solution to the crisis. Operation Rolling Thunder bombed the hell out of the communists, but within the year, Johnson would send in the first of America's ground troops. The debate over U.S. involvement was immediate, as from the onset, fully 24% of Americans rejected the war effort. The debate would only heat up as more and more Americans came to resent Johnson's war. 1968 proved a pivotal year, as the lies of the U.S. government were shattered with live television coverage of the North Vietnamese Tet Offensive, which was broadcast into American living rooms. After years of being told they were winning, Americans could see the truth with their own eyes. 3 months later, American soldiers committed war crimes as 504 defenseless civilians were killed, countless women were raped, and homes were burnt to the ground. It would be months before the nation would learn of the crimes ordered by Lieutenant William Calley. But with the debate over American involvement still reaching a higher level, President Johnson announced he would not seek re-election. The anti-war effort already operating and thriving on college campuses exploded. Even worse, the U.S. government conducted a draft of fighting-aged men on December 1st, 1969, causing the divided nation to find yet another cleavage as debate over draft equity took center stage. Compulsory service through the draft was an instrument that historically allowed the rich to buy off and the middle class to escape by going to college, thus leaving the fighting to be done by those of the lower classes, namely the poor and minorities. Richard Nixon became president in 1969 and began searching for a diplomatic way out of the war, but only if peace with dignity, as he called it, could be achieved. This meant taking the war beyond the boundaries of Vietnam through bombing campaigns in Laos and Cambodia, which only inflamed the debate, tearing the nation apart. Simultaneously, Nixon's Vietnamization effort saw more responsibilities given to the Vietnamese as the U.S. began removing troops. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger's agreement with North Vietnamese Foreign Minister Le Duc Thao brought a diplomatic conclusion to America's involvement in Vietnam to a close, but not an end to the war before communists unified the nation under their flag. The United States failed to find a diplomatic solution to the Vietnam War because it was too busy fighting itself. Debates over civil rights, college course offerings, women's rights, and a host of social issues left the nation without the ability to support a war in Vietnam. Sadly, none of those debates ended with a satisfactory diplomacy because women still find themselves in second-class citizenship. African Americans have yet to find equal treatment within our society, and those who served in Vietnam continue to be the nation's ignored veterans we'd rather not talk about because we never knew who or what we were fighting for. In the words of Walt Kelly, "We have met the enemy and he is us. Fighting Nazis is easy by comparison."